One of the places, in fact, I was told by a Republican that that they really didn't want to pick fights with labor, even though they still are. But nothing huge, because they don't want to put their members through what we did to them at forums and so on in the last 2 years, especially the new people. So we, together, we were collectively fairly effective at getting our message out at these forums, but there's lots of different places that you lobby that we've been talking about, and talking to legislators can happen in all different kinds of forums. One person who is, quite an expert on, well, a lot of things, and somebody who we rely on for our digital work in a lot of cases. We rely on Progress Iowa for communication and in so many different areas. They are really a true friend of the Federation and many unions in this state. But yesterday was about going to the Hill. Today, one of the things we wanted to talk about was what to do outside of the Golden Dome when you're talking to legislators, and especially at forums. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Sinovic, who is from Progress Iowa, who's going to talk about how to be effective at forums.
Okay, thank you, Charlie, and thank you everyone at the IFL for letting us have the time here today to present. I'm going to make sure I know how the hell to do this first. Okay, great. It's really great to be here and to talk about this. How many of you have been to a legislative forum before? I hope. All right, let me try and put some people on the spot. Who hasn't been to one? Okay, there's a few hands, all right. Well, even if you've been to a lot of these, there are ways to get the most out of them and to do this beforehand, afterwards, and I think it's really important to be face-to-face with your elected officials. And a lot of times, as you know, if you've been to these, this picture is from a couple years ago at the height of the collective bargaining fight, and most of the forums are not usually like this. They're typically smaller. A lot of the ones that I've been to anyway, I probably have been to 40 or 50 over the last few years, many of them in very small counties with Senator Chuck Grassley, trying to push him on a number of issues. And when you get in a room like that, you can really have a frank discussion with your elected officials, and you can put them on the spot and stick it to them. So it's really important to do that. And Iowans are doing that all over the place. So I think I'm going to put up my contact information, but I also want you to write that down if you want. If you have any questions, and I'm going to give it to you again at the end, but I like to do this twice. If you have any questions, need anything as you're out of a forum, that's my cell phone. You can text, email anytime, call, and we'll get you the information that you need. So I'm going to leave that up for just a second while I talk about just sort of my belief about how these events ought to work. I think it's really important to remember that our elected officials should be more scared of us than we are of them, and I know that probably you all know that, but as you're bringing members out to these events, it's easier for people to get intimidated. It's easier for people to wonder if they really have the ability to ask these questions of their elected official, but they're the ones who should be on the spot, and it's not just you standing in that room. So I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that in a minute. But first, we want to talk about some ground rules. I do think it's important to be polite, persistent, and to get personal. Now, polite, I think it's so critical that we represent ourselves well. when asking a question and following up and discussing with our legislators, because it is the easiest thing for them to dismiss if we do something that puts us in a bad spot. And that could be just about anything. And this doesn't mean just sort of laying back and letting them run the conversation, but it means being respectful and having the information, and just representing yourself well. Being persistent obviously means that you're not going to be a pushover. I mean, you can be polite and persistent at the same time. And we'll talk about following up in a minute, but it is your job, it's their job to work for you, and so it's your job to make sure that they know that you're there and you mean business. Now, the last point, when I say get personal, this doesn't necessarily mean about your elected official, but it could. What I really mean is that you need to get personal about why whatever you're talking about matters to you. And we'll go through a script for that in just a minute as well. But you need to talk about why it matters to you personally, or if it's one of your members, why it matters to them personally, because it is a hell of a lot harder for that elected official to argue with that. You can go back and forth, and I've had these discussions with legislators where, oh, there's these studies that say this, there's these studies that say this, and they can come up with some bullshit study from the Heritage Foundation or ALEC, or even if it's not ALEC, it's funded by ALEC. And they can do that all day long. But what they cannot do is say that you are wrong because of whatever situation you're going through on the job or with your health care or whatever. If you express that in a personal way, it's really hard for them to push back on that, because that is your life, that is your experience, or your member, whoever is asking the question. So don't be afraid to get personal. Now, you can get personal about them if it impacts their family, their kids. If you know, like, that cuts are happening and it's going to affect where their kids go to school or their community, then you can bring it back on them and ask them about that too. So that's what I mean. You can get personal about them if it impacts their life. So here's some quick tips. One is show up early. I asked a bunch of legislators, and I'll get to their tips in a minute, about what to be most effective at forums, but showing up early is really, really important. So let's pretend, I'm going to pretend that this room right now, you're going to be at a legislative forum here in a few minutes or later today. If this is the room, where do you want to sit? If this is a room and you're going to ask a question of a legislator who's speaking up here, where do you want to sit? Right up front, right? So in order to do that, you don't know how many people are going to be there, so you better get there early. I mean, 45 minutes, an hour early, if you have the ability to. So plant yourself in the front row, because that just hugely increases your chances of getting to ask your question. The second is to know the rules. So some forums you have to write it down. Some will they'll raise your hand and you get called on. That's how Chuck Grassley actually runs his forums or his meetings. He just points at you and asks and says you can ask a question. But a lot of people will, like David Young used to have them written down, he'd draw them out of a bucket. Everybody has different rules, so find out what the rules are and use them to your advantage. So if you know that you have to write down questions and you know that there's one question that you want to have asked, then get 10 people there and have them all submit the same question. You just increase your chances of getting it asked. So the third is to write down your question and practice. I'll give you a sample script here in a minute, but this is really important, because when you get the chance to ask your question, you want to be sure that you get it right. There's nothing wrong with writing it down and reading it off the piece of paper. It doesn't matter if you think you ought to memorize it or you think you ought to know. When you're in the room with your elected official, you don't want to waste that opportunity. So write it down and even read it if you have to. And this is especially important if you're kind of coaching someone who's not been at a forum before, or maybe they've only done it once before. People can get nervous. It's natural. It happens. I mean, I talk to reporters on a regular basis, and almost all the time, if I have time, I write down what I want to say. And it doesn't mean I say that verbatim, but I've got it right in front of me, because you never know what's going to happen, and you just need to, if you know what you want to say, write it down. Don't take a chance with it. The fourth is to make sure you craft your message. Can anyone tell me what a good message does, really quickly? What'd you say? Frames the issue. Yep. Anything else? Promotes a talking point. Sure. I think those are both right, but I'm going to kind of go step one level higher, or think of it a bigger picture. I think your message should connect with your audience, and you have to think about who your audience is when you're asking that question. So this gets to the number 6 point. But if I'm the legislator up here and you're asking me a question, who's your audience in that situation? Anybody? Who's that? Constituents? Did someone say constituents? Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think it's the legislator too. If you think you can convince that legislator to vote one way or another, then your audience is the legislator. But a lot of the time, we know what our legislators think. I mean, or we know what their voting record is, so we're coming in there to make an argument, to make a point. So your audience is really your constituents, or hopefully if there's press in the room, and those constituents are reached by recording video and getting information out after the fact. So that's incredibly important. But as you're crafting your message and you're writing down your question, think about who you're trying to reach and who you're trying to convince of whatever issue you're trying to put in front of them. The number 5 here I think is very important too. So again, thinking about this room, and I've had David Young sneak out of the back door of a restaurant before and drive off, running scared. So this is like legitimately important, because they will run scared if they, if they saw a bunch of you in the room, probably. If you're in this room and let's say you've got a half dozen people. Well, maybe you've got one person up front to ask a question. Then you've got people prepped with questions sitting at that table, that table, that table, and that table. Because then, if they're trying to get out of here, then someone can stand up and walk and greet them at the door. And I've seen this work too. So I didn't write this down, but I've seen this work where you shake their hand and you smile and you don't let go until they answer your question. And you literally just smile and shake their hand and don't let go until they answer your question. And you should have someone there recording that video. And if they're the one to pull away, if they're the one to walk away from you as you're asking the question, you get that on video, then you send it to us and we can share it with the world. And that's where you're being polite but persistent. You're not you're not being rude to them, but you're being in their face and being very polite and asking your question in a personal way that talks about your experience with whatever issue that you're dealing with, that you want to ask them about. But you can really do that. I have seen that work a number of times, where someone has just held on and shake hands with that elected official, and you just keep smiling and keep making that grip a little bit tighter, and then they're the ones who are in that position. Like I said at the beginning, they should be more scared of us than we are of them. Because if they pull away, if they run away, if they say something that puts them in a bad, if they get impolite or disrespectful, that looks so much worse on that elected official. So don't be afraid to be polite and persistent and really get in their face politely. And that video is crucially important. I can't tell you how many times you see someone commenting on Facebook, or they'll talk to us about this, or they might even try to write a letter to the editor afterwards that says such and such representative was so rude and dismissive and da da da. And if you have video of it, There's nothing they can do to dispute that. There's nothing that they can do to dispute what they actually said. There's nothing they can do to dispute how they treated you. Because a lot of times they might treat you with some disrespect. If you come in and politely and persistently ask your personal question, they might be a little bit turned off by that because they're not maybe used to getting that kind of respectful pressure. So it's really, really important that you have somebody recording. Everybody's got a camera on their, or most people have a camera on their cell phone. It doesn't have to be the highest quality, doesn't matter. Just get it on video and get close so you can get good sound too. That's really important because sometimes it's hard to hear these responses if you're really far away with your cell phone. So those are a few tips that I usually share. Here are some actually from legislators. I'm going to forget some, but I sent out an ask to some Democratic legislators to see what they thought about legislative forums, and Mary Masher, Wes Breckenridge, Heather Mattson, Karen Derry. There were a bunch that replied and got back to me, which was really great. Some of them talked about what we've already discussed. But here are a few that I thought were really, really good to think about too. So one is to know the counter arguments to your question. So after you've crafted your question, think about what do you think they might say, and then what could you say back as a follow-up. The next was to prepare a one-pager with contact info and details. I actually had not thought of this, and this is great. Like if you've got to leave something that you can leave behind with that legislator, saying maybe who you are, the question that you've asked, a fact or two that you can get from Ken, Charlie, Lance, anyone at the Fed, or we're happy to help you with that too. Get you some research and information to share with the legislator, and then where they can contact you if they want afterwards. That's a great idea too. You can request your own forum. Mary Masher suggested this, that you can request a time to meet with that legislator or put on your own forum with them. Arriving early, I can't remember who said this one, but anyway, even 45 minutes to an hour, which we talked about, but that is getting in the room and getting in right up front is half the battle, because then you're going to be one of the ones to ask a question. And someone actually suggested that those green, red, agree, and disagree cards can be helpful to just show the level of support in a crowd. So some people like those, some don't, but one of the legislators said that was a helpful tip as well. Here's a script, and I assume, Lance, that we can share these slides with everyone, so you'll get this. So I don't think you need to write it down verbatim, but right now. But you do an introduction. Start with your name, where you're from. I think this is important too. If you're one of their constituents, say what your hometown is, so they know that you are a voter in their district. Explain why you're there. Be explicit. If you're there to ask them to oppose or support a bill, say, I'm here to ask you to support or oppose Senate file, da-da-da-da-da, whatever the number is. Be that clear, be that explicit. Then how this has affected you, or your family, your friends, making it personal in some way. Even if it's not your personal story, you can share something that's happened with one of your members, with one of your family members, one of your neighbors, and explain it in as clear a way as you can about you personally, or how it's affected someone personally. Then thank them, even if you think they're gonna ignore you, even if you think they're full of shit, like thank them anyway, because that level of politeness and level of respectfulness represents you well, represents the issue that you're fighting for really well. Then follow up. Don't be afraid to follow up every time. Even if you think they partially answered your question, follow up. Even if they answered your question, have another one that you're ready to ask. Because once you are standing there in front of them, don't give up the floor, don't give up that platform until you have to, in my opinion, because you don't know how often you get that chance. So keep asking them questions politely, respectfully, but follow up. Because most of the time, even if you think they answered your question, listen closely, because I'd be willing to bet that they didn't, that they spun around it or gave you some BS that just to be able to move on. So that's crafting your question and then following up. Here's some tips of how to find your elected officials. We post these forums online regularly. You can also, I'm going to give you a text line to text here in a minute if everyone get out their phone. You can text 306, you're going to text to 30644 and text the letters IFL. Text IFL to 30644. And that'll prompt you to sign up for our emails, which includes updates about what's going on at the Capitol, legislative forums, everything like that. So text IFL to 30644. 30644 IFL. I'll say it again at the end. But progressiowa.org and iowalabornews. Is it .com, Lance? I put it on there. Okay, it's .com. Great, I got it right. So Lance does a great job of posting forums as well on that website. And so whatever's publicly available is usually on one of our websites, but a lot of times they kind of duck and hide these forums. They post them, one random PDF post online, and it gets shared with like 5 of their Facebook friends, and that's it. So you can call them, you can find them, you can call members of Congress, you can call the governor's office, you can call and ask if they know anything that's going on. You can look at you can call your legislator. You can that's the switchboard number, or our website ialegis.org has a list of every legislator and their contact information. So you can go through and find it there. So you can call and ask them. There's nothing that says you can't call and ask them when these forums are going to be. So those are a few ways to find them, to find your elected officials. And then other ideas for speaking out. It's not just at forums. You can go in person, obviously at a forum, to the Capitol, to their office. If they have something like that in the district, you can write a letter to the editor. I think this is a huge step that people don't think about sometimes when they're going to a forum. Because if you've just had a legislative forum in your district or in your area, and you've had an experience asking a question of an elected official, and you write a letter about it, in the next few days and submit it to your local paper, odds are they're going to publish it because it's timely and it's from one of the constituents who just had an interaction with their local rep. So think about that as you're going into asking a question. What question are you going to ask? How are you going to follow up with them directly? And then take that experience and write it down. Most letters to the editor are like 100 words. They're not very long. It does not take that long to write this, but if you want help, we'll help you. I'm sure that the Fed staff will help you too, but you can write that letter and get even press coverage of a forum after the fact if you do it quickly. You can share information online. A lot of people do that on Facebook, Twitter, other social media. Call your elected officials, and then sign up with progressiowa.org. Sign up with the link that you got when you texted IFL to 30644. And we share a lot of information about other organizations too. So there are a lot of different ways that you can speak out and get involved. So here's my contact information again: cell phone, email, our Twitter page, our Facebook page. Please contact me. Contact us if you have any questions. Obviously, I'll take any. If we have time, I'll take questions right now. But if you want,
we have time. Does anyone have any questions for Matt? None?
Come on. Carrie's got one.
All right.
I don't need to call you. I don't need to email you because I see you everywhere.
That's true.
Me too.
Okay. That's
Oh,
good.
hold on. Dan's got one.
All right.
I had a little experience with Steve King a couple of years ago. I kind of held him
sorry.
in an elevator. Steve King?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a short little guy. He's got short syndrome. Anyway, he kind of introduced me to the mall police when he told him I kidnapped him. And of course, it got straightened out, but you got to watch the situation you got put in. All I did is hit everyone on the elevator on the way down so we could have a little conversation. But it kind of backfired.
Yeah. All right. I think that's, I mean, I've had that happen before where like security gets called or police gets called, and you know, it's kind of learning trial by fire, but I think it's important there. You have multiple people, if you have multiple people around that can sort of attest to what you're doing, or more importantly, not doing, if you're not doing any threatening, you know, whatever, having a group is helpful, and then recording that video. I mean, like recording video as much as you possibly can, and that way, after the fact, if you're just asking, you know, if you're doing all these things, if you're being polite and being respectful, but, you know, asking questions, and some elected official calls the cops on you, that's terrible. Like, that's awful. But if you don't have that video, then it becomes he said, she said, and it's a lot harder to, you know, to make the case about it. But a elected official calling the cops on a constituent is it's bad. It's bad of them to do, but it's also politically disastrous for them if you've got that if you've got a video of it. So.